Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. Here is my late wrap up for April. These are all the books that I read last month. I read a total of 25 books. Most of them were actually 4 stars, so it's a pretty solid reading month for me. Though I will say this first one, it was not off to a good start because I gave this one 2 stars. My first April read was Sadie on a Plate by Amanda Elliott. I had high hopes for it only because it's a foodie romance, but there was barely any romance here. If I knew that going in, I probably could have adjusted my expectations, but it's published by Berkeley and they publish romances, so that's what I thought I was getting. But for some reason, they just have a lot of trouble categorizing their books, which doesn't help them and it doesn't help their readers either. So this book is very much just focused on the heroine, on this cooking competition, and not at all on the romance. You could call this chick lit or women's or contemporary fiction because the main characters, they barely talk or interact in this book. The heroine Sadie is a chef who's just been fired from her restaurant and she gets called in to join this reality cooking show competition called Chef Supreme. She meets a guy named Luke while traveling to New York City for this cooking competition, and it turns out that Luke is none other than one of the judges. I will say if you like anything cooking competition related, this might be for you. Just don't expect any good romance here. I did like how the cooking competition played out in this book. We get a lot of it. Obviously, it's the focus of it. And I really liked how Sadie incorporated Jewish foods into the show. But since it's me, I needed more from the romance. I expected a romance and I didn't really get it, so 2 stars. I then read Below Zero by Hazelwood. This is the 3rd and final novella in her Steminist series, which I've been enjoying so much. I gave this one 4 stars. It's another adorable read. Hannah is the last of the trio to get her romance here, and it's another enemies to lovers romance. She is this NASA aerospace engineer and she gets stranded on this remote Arctic research station, and the only one who is willing and who actually shows up to save her is none other than her nemesis. Ian is the guy she hates and the guy who supposedly tried to ruin her career. There is miscommunication here because obviously Ian didn't do what she thought he did to her, but I kind of love the angst that came with this miscommunication. I mean, usually it bothers me, but here I kind of liked it. And like the other novellas, we get snippets of how Ian and Hannah first met because they knew each other before they became enemies. They actually started falling for each other when they first met, but then obviously this thing blew up that caused them to not like each other, or at least caused Hannah not to like Ian. They were just the most adorable nerds here and I had so much fun listening to this audiobook. My next 3 books are part of a series. I read another reverse harem romance series, the St. View Prison series by L. Thorpe. This first one is Locked Up Liars and I give it 5 stars. My first 5-star read of this month. It was amazing. I loved it. I love this series. It's even better than the St. View High series, which I also really enjoyed. It's a spin-off of the high school series, but this time it's adults, so anyone who doesn't like high school, read the series. So the St. View Prison series, it's a slightly dark adult reverse harem romance series that's set around a prison. It's romantic suspense, so there's a ton of twists and turns going on, and Locked Up Liars was a really great start to the series. I loved May, our heroine, and her 3 heroes who all bring something a little bit different to their reverse harem relationship. We have Heath, who is May's sister's ex, which normally I would feel a little bit weird about, but Heath is just a really nice guy that you don't feel bothered about that previous relationship at all. And plus, Heath is the one who gets framed and sent to prison for May's sister's murder. Her sister was a police officer, but of course he didn't do it. And then we have Ro, who is one of the security guards at the prison where Heath is. It's very much hate/lust at first sight for Ro and May, and also for Heath and Ro. And finally, we have Liam, who was an old classmate of May's back in high school. She kind of hated him, but also had a crush on him back then, and he also had a crush on her, but now he's a lawyer and he is the lawyer that May asked to help Heath with for his trial. Locked Up Liars was great. I loved it. I had so much fun reading it. I've become such a huge fan of L. Thorpe's now after reading the St. View High series and now the St. View Prison series. And then the next 2 books are Solitary Sinners and Fatal Felons, both of which I gave 4 stars. It wasn't like an obsessive love like the first book was, but they were both really, really good. I won't say too much for the second and third book just because there are a bunch of spoilers, but basically the series is about May trying to get Heath out of prison, both legally and illegally. She gets a job working as a teacher at the prison where Heath is, and she also enlists the help of Ro and Liam to get Heath out. Liam and Heath are both total suckers for May, and Ro's the one who holds himself back the most. He's the only one she has like an enemies to lovers relationship with because he has experienced loss in the past and he never wants to experience that again. So there is the most tension between May and Ro, but then there's also some tension going on between Ro and Heath. The series is super hot, but it is a little bit slow burn just because, I mean, one of the guys is literally in prison and she barely gets any time with him. So it's a little bit slow burn, but it's still got some great steam. There's some good suspense here as well. They're trying to figure out who killed May's sister and who set Heath up. It was such a great series, highly recommend it. And also we are getting another spin-off set in this world. We're getting another reverse harem. It's a trilogy called The St. Few Psychos, and one of the heroes is actually another prisoner who we get to meet in St. Few prison. It's Vincent. He is a complete psycho in this series and I already love him. Next I read Flock by Kate Stewart. I wasn't sure what to expect with this one. I mean, I know so many people love the series. People talk about the Raven Hood trilogy all the time, so I wanted to give it a try, and I finally did, and sadly I did not like it as much as everyone else did. I gave this one 2 stars. I will say I kind of knew going into the series that something tragic would happen because literally anytime anyone talks about the series, they have like 10 crying face emojis. So nothing exactly sad happens in this first book, but I expected sadness to happen in like the second or third book, but I couldn't really make it past this first book, or more like I didn't really want to. Flock was just really annoying to read. I hate romances where the hero, or heroes in this case because there are 2 guys here, I hate when a hero keeps the heroine deliberately in the dark about something because she's either not good enough to know or they're trying to be all quirky and cool and poetic, and that's pretty much how the heroes acted here. Dominic and Sean just felt like they knew better than Cecilia constantly throughout the book, and I got so tired of reading that. Anyway, this is a new adult romance with a heroine who goes to live with her estranged father. He's a wealthy man who owns like the biggest company in this small town, and she goes to work for this company. But then she slowly finds out that there's something shady going on, not just in the company, but also in this town. Sean is one of her coworkers. He's one of the heroes, and he brings her into his fold. He like introduces her to his friends, to his community, which is very secretive and hides a lot of stuff that you never really figure out until the very end of this book. Sean is friends with Dominic, our second hero, who has so much attitude for absolutely no reason. Flock starts off as a romance between Cecilia and Sean, and then Dominic kind of slips his way in, pun intended. So then it became a menage, a threesome, and the steam was by far the best part about this book for me, because when we find out the truth towards the end of the book, or at least like part of the truth, I was really underwhelmed. There are so many secrets for just that, and maybe I'm missing something because I only read this first book, but yeah, I was super underwhelmed. I'm sad I didn't love this one though because it seems like everyone does, but the audiobook I will say was fantastic. The narration was great. It's like a duet narration, and that in the steam is the only reason why I give this some 2 stars and not 1. I then read some Samantha Young books next. I read the first 2 books in her Adair family series. The first one is Here With Me, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed them both. It's been a while since I last read Samantha Young, but I do really like her stuff, and this series is her latest one, I believe. It's a series of standalones about the Adair family, of course. It's set in Scotland, and this first one is about the oldest of the family, Lachlan. He is a former Hollywood star who is now a recluse. The heroine, Robin, is a former police officer. She got injured while on the job, and she decides to leave her life, leave her job in Boston, and go all the way to Scotland to see her estranged father. Her father actually abandoned her family when she was young, and he decided to pursue a career in private security and work for Lachlan, which is why Robin holds a lot of bitterness towards her father and also Lachlan. It's very much an enemies to lovers romance, and there's a lot of good tension and animosity between Robin and Lachlan. Mixed in with the romance is this mystery with an anonymous stalker who gets more and more dangerous with each incident. Like, the stalker is going after not just Lachlan but Robin too. And like I said before, the book is set in Scotland. It's set in the Highlands, and oh my gosh, when I was reading this one, on. It made me wish I was back in Scotland. I miss it there so much. I also love the whole father-daughter relationship that was woven into the story. Like, that relationship starts off very broken, but then we slowly get to see the both of them heal after some truths come out. It's a pretty thick book. It's like 500 pages, but I thought it was great. It's like a good balance of romance, steam, mystery, and suspense. I then read the next book in the series, There With You, which is about Robin's sister and Lachlan's brother. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was also great. It's a single parent age gap nanny romance. I had to read this one right after I finished the first book because Robin's sister Regan, she actually shows up at the end of the first book. She shows up in Scotland at the Adair family house, and we already knew that Regan kind of did Robin dirty. Robin, as the older sister, was always there for Regan, but the one time that Robin needed Regan didn't show up, so she's portrayed as very selfish and flighty. But now the sisters are back together, and Regan actually wants a chance to make things right with her sister. She also has another reason to hide out in Scotland, which is a stalker, a dangerous stalker who is obsessed with her. Like I said, this is a single parent romance. The hero is the single dad, a single dad of 2, and I love this trope, especially if there's a nanny and there's an age gap. Thane is Lachlan's younger brother. He is a widowed father of 2, and he reluctantly agrees to hire Regan as his new nanny. He's very reluctant and unsure about her because of the way she acted before, the way that he's her not the best things about her, but he does give her a chance and ends up falling for her. Like the first book, there is a good dose of suspense here, but I love the romance. I mean, I love these tropes, and Thane and Regan were so angsty together. I also really like the development of Regan's character. Like, everyone thinks that Regan just isn't the best person. Her actions before have shown that she's selfish and flighty, but now she's really trying hard to prove herself to her sister, to everyone else, and I really felt for her. I got more annoyed at Thane, to be honest, for being so hot and cold with her, but yeah, this one was great. I really liked it. It's been a fantastic series so far. I then read Right Where I Want You by Jessica Hawkins, which I gave 3 stars to. This was my first time reading Jessica Hawkins, and it was okay. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. It was fine. It's an enemies to lovers romance set in the office, which is always promising for me. Sebastian, the hero, is the creative director of this famous men's magazine called A Modern Man. Sebastian is a notorious playboy, and he's kind of put on this reputation, not just on himself, but also for this magazine. It used to help the company in the past, but now this reputation is kind of ruining it and is putting his job in jeopardy. That's why Georgina, the heroine, is brought on as the new PR consultant to fix up his image and fix up the company's image. She only has 8 weeks to do this, and Sebastian is not making it easy on her to do it. She is a total girl boss, and Sebastian just isn't happy to have this random woman all up in his business. So I generally like this one, but I just can't say it was anything that memorable or unique. Sebastian and Georgina were fine. The romance kind of took its time to develop. It's a little slow just because Sebastian is so against anything to do with Georgina, at least at first. So the romance was a bit of a slow burn, which I don't mind at all, but this was just the kind of read where I immediately forgot about it as soon as I finished it. So this maybe wasn't the best Jessica Hawkins book to start with, but I do want to try her again just because I've heard really great things about her books. I read another new to me author for the first time. I read Hero by Lauren Rowe. This is the first standalone in the Morgan Brothers series, and it is very much an insta-love kind of romance, at least on the hero side, which I will never get tired of reading. I give this one 4 stars. It was great. We have the hero Colby, who is a firefighter who is in the hospital recovering from a fire. The heroine Lydia is his physical therapist, and it's love at first sight for him. Even though Colby was high out of his mind on painkillers, he still recognized Lydia as his soulmate, as the love of his life. So he knew she was the one, but Lydia, on the other hand, doesn't really want to get involved with anyone, especially not with someone with such a dangerous job. Her late husband was a first responder who died on the job, who left her with her 3 young children. But Colby can't resist being all swoony and flirty, and they start up this forbidden relationship. It's forbidden because this fraternization with patients isn't allowed, and if anyone found out about Lydia and Colby, she'd be fired. But the romance is so sweet. sweet, and I loved Colby's family. I mean, yes, they're kind of cheesy with the way they talk to each other, but they were still cute. It's a fun and adorable romance. Lydia's kids are cute too, and even though there are some heavier parts to this book, it was just a very light and fluffy read, and for my first Lauren Rowe book, it was great. Another new to me author duo, I read Dark Fae by Carolyn Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. This is the first book in the Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac series, which is a reverse harem fantasy romance series. It's set at this college academy. I was kind of worried it's going to be high school, but thank God no. It's college. These characters are over 18, and I was surprised by how much fun I had reading this one. I give it 4 stars. I like the characters. I love this world. I mean, it's a lot going on. There's a lot of info dumping, but I still really enjoyed myself. We have the vampire heroine and her 4 heroes who are known as kings at the school. They're basically like the leaders of their families. We have a dragon shifter, a basilisk, a lion shifter, and a harpy. And the reason why Elise attends this prestigious academy is because her brother went there and he was murdered. So she's trying to find out who killed her brother, and she suspects one of the kings did it. She starts to develop a relationship with all 4 of the guys, but each at its varying pace. One of them gets very physical quickly, another one is just slow burn, and we do get everyone's point of view, so it does get to be a lot, but if you can handle all the wordiness and all the info dumping, it's good. I can definitely see why a lot of people get addicted to this author duo, because I'm pretty invested in this series now. I then read a highly anticipated sequel of mine, a highly anticipated standalone sequel, which is The Heir Apparent's Rejected Mate by Kate C. Wells. Sadly though, I didn't love this one as much as the first book. I had such high expectations after loving the Tyrant Alpha's Rejected Mate, but the second one just wasn't as good. The story moves so slowly and the romance barely develops. Like, I feel like we just only scratched the surface of this romance. Also, there's no groveling until the very end of the book, and I was kind of misled with this blurb because it talks about an accidental pregnancy, and if I see an accidental pregnancy in a blurb, I expect the whole book to be about that pregnancy, or at least for the pregnancy to happen early on in the book, but no, it doesn't happen until maybe the last third. So it's kind of a strange choice to include it in the blurb when the story isn't really about the surprise baby, and it was weirdly also a high school romance, which I was not expecting. Rosie and Katee, I still don't really know how to pronounce his name. Rosie and Katee are shifters and in their last year of high school. They're classmates at the shifter high school, and he is pretty much the heir of their pack. He's practically royalty, and he's been groomed his whole life to take over the pack, and Rosie is known as one of these scavengers, which are basically the bottom of the pack. I want to say 80% of the book is Katee choosing his pack and duty over Rosie over anything else, which wasn't exactly what I wanted to read in a romance, and because of this, the romance moves at a glacial pace. The last third of the book is when the story picks up finally, and when everything starts to happen. This is when the pregnancy happens, this is when Katee gets his head out of his ass, and even though I liked this part, it ended on such a strange note that I was left unsatisfied at the end. There was still so much to be explored with this pack, with these characters, with this romance, that I just wanted more from the story. Honestly, the ending felt more like a midway point than an actual ending. I did really love the scavengers though. I would love more stories about them. So sadly, this one just didn't live up to my expectations. I gave it 3 stars. Honestly, I just wanted more groveling in this one because of how good it was in the Tyrant Alpha's Rejected Mate. So let's hope that the 3rd book is better. I then read Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. I wasn't too sure what to expect going into this one because their latest books have been very hit or miss, but I enjoyed this one a lot. I gave it 4 stars. I love the second chance romance, which is my favorite trope to read, and I love the whole treasure hunting aspect to it. I had a ton of fun reading Lily and Leo's romance. It reminded me a lot of Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. So these two first met and fell in love a decade ago on Lily's family's horse ranch, but then circumstances tore them apart and made both of them believe that the other didn't love them anymore. Now, 10 years later, Lily has lost her family's ranch and she's been working as this treasure hunting tour guide for tourists. She's trying to save up money to buy back her ranch, and this is the reason why Leo comes back into her life, because this year's road trip takes her on her retreat. There's just so much good longing here, especially especially on Leo's part. You can just tell how much these two still love each other. So the second chance romance was super emotional and angsty, which means I loved it. There's also the whole treasure hunting thing in the middle of a desert. There's 6 of them, including Lily and Leo, and there's some unexpected mystery and suspense thrown in here too. They go on a real life treasure hunt and not one that Lily and her partner came up with. Sadly though, it's not that steamy, which is such a tragedy, but still I had a lot of fun with it. I could not stop reading it, and also I am obsessed with this embossing on this hardcover. My next read was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I gave this one 4 stars. It's the 3rd book in the Brown Sister series, which has been fantastic. It's not my top favorite of the series, but it's still very, very enjoyable. It's another adorable read like the first 2 books, and it's such a lovely opposites attract kind of romance. Eve is the youngest sister, and she is the flighty one, the one who can never hold down a job. She's a certified hot mess, and her parents have finally issued her an ultimatum. She has to stick to a job for at least a year and find her own place, or else she gets no more money from them. She finds a job at a bed and breakfast with their hero Jacob, though their first meeting does not go well at all. Jacob is the one who's interviewing Eve, and she shows up wearing this shirt with a quirky quote, and Jacob can't help staring at the quote, so it looks like he's staring at her boobs. And then after the disastrous interview, Eve accidentally runs Jacob over with her car. So it is honestly the worst possible first meeting for these two, but Jacob does eventually hire Eve, and these two are the cutest thing together. Eve is like this messy, chaotic person, and then Jacob is this grumpy, quiet hero. They couldn't be more different, but they were still so wonderful together. It's a very feel-good, cozy kind of read. I could not stop laughing and smiling while I was reading this one. I just really love Talia Hibbert's writing and her sense of humor, and this was a great ending for the Brown Sister series. I also read Heart and Soul by Jen Frederick. I knew this wasn't going to be a romance going into it, so that part was fine. I don't mind reading women's fiction when I know it's women's fiction, so I didn't expect much from the romance, but the story itself wasn't the best. I give it 3 stars. It's about this girl named Hara who is Korean American, and she was adopted into a white family. Growing up and even as an adult, she never felt like she fit in, not with her family, not at school, and not even with other Koreans. So she tries to find herself by trying to find her biological parents. She comes into contact with her biological father, and she flies all the way to Seoul to South Korea to meet him. While in Seoul, she meets a guy named Yoo-jun who is her love interest. He's actually really into her for some reason that I could never understand, but the focus of the story is definitely on Hara trying to find her family, her biological family. She goes with her friend who's basically her translator. They go through this list of possible mothers she could have. I wasn't the biggest fan of Hara's character. She came off as selfish at times, and also the whole reveal at the end about her parents, about her mom, was so strange. I just didn't know what to think. And then of course Hara and Yoo-jun's relationship is kind of left open-ended. The story wasn't the worst, but Hara was just too all over the place for me to really enjoy this one, so it was okay. My next read was another 5-star read. It was Four Aunties and a Wedding by Jessica Sutanto. This is a sequel to Dali for Aunties, which I loved last year. It was one of my favorite books of 2021. It was a hilarious rom-com, and I swear this sequel was even funnier than the first book. I actually listened to this one in audio, and I highly recommend it because the narrator did such an amazing job with all the voices, all the accents, the Chinese, Indonesian accents. Like the story itself is like a 4.5 stars, but I have to bump it up to 5 because of this audiobook. I was legit cracking up while I was listening to this one, so it was great. But this is another ridiculous and entertaining story with Medi and her 4 aunties, well, her mom and her 3 aunties, and this time the mafia may or may not be involved. In the midst of all this wedding preparation chaos, Medi overhears her wedding photographer talking about offing someone. So obviously like the first thing that Medi thinks about is that Stephanie, the wedding photographer, is part of the mafia. It's totally over the top and unbelievable, but that's why I loved it so much. The reveal at the end about the families was hilarious. I loved it, and I just had the best time reading it. It is a direct sequel though to Dali for Aunties, so I do recommend reading that one first before reading this one. I then read another favorite last month, which is 10 Trends to Seduce Your Best Friend by Penny Reid. This one is a friends to lovers romance, which I love reading, but it is a little bit different too, just because we get to see the main characters become friends in in this book at first, and then they start falling, or at least the heroine starts falling because the hero has had a crush on the heroine for a very long time. But this was such a fun read. I adore Penny Reid's books, and this one was another great romance from her. Winnie, the heroine, is a science school teacher, and she's also a STEM influencer on social media, on TikTok especially, and she's been trying to grow her following there so she can get this side social media job to pay off her student loans. Our hero Byron is a world-famous best-selling author, fiction author, and he is quite the broody recluse, and he's very antisocial. He's actually Winnie's roommate's best friend, and Byron and Winnie have been acquaintances for a really long time through these mutual friends, and throughout the years Winnie has been completely oblivious to how Byron feels about her, but at the same time he's not that obvious about how he feels anyway. The story then sort of becomes this fake dating, fake relationship romance because Byron helps Winnie out. He helps her get a ton of followers because of how famous he is and how he's never on social media, but he joins her on her TikTok. They pretend to be best friends, and they also pretend to slowly fall in love with each other through this series of videos. It's a pretty unique storyline, and I did love the slow burn here, at least the slow burn for Winnie falling for Byron. The two of them get all confused and angsty about what they're doing because it almost feels real, but they can't tell if it is. The chemistry is great, and I loved how they were both so dorky and quirky. It's got a lot of great tropes. I give it 4 stars. I adored it. If you love slow burn, press the lovers, fake dating, you should read this one. My next read was Camilla Knows Best by Farrah Harron. I give this one 4 stars. This is a South Asian retelling of Emma by Jane Austen. It's a pretty loose retelling, I will say. It's a friends to lovers romance, another friends to lovers romance, and it was adorable. I love Camilla. She is just a girl living her good life. She plans at Bollywood movie parties. She helps set up her friends' love lives, and she also owns a dog, which you can kind of see on the cover, who is pretty famous on Instagram. Rohan is our hero. He's a longtime friend of Camilla's family, and she's always considered him a very good friend, at least until recently. And then to add a little bit more drama, Camilla's childhood nemesis shows up. She's back in town, and she seems to be growing very close to Rohan, which makes Camilla jealous, even though she's oblivious to what she's feeling. Camilla was just a very endearing heroine. I mean, in Emma is pretty annoying. She gets a bit much with her meddling, but Camilla, you can clearly see that she really wants the best for everyone around her. The side plot with Camilla and her nemesis, I really liked how that turned out because it turns out this enemy relationship that she always thought it wasn't actually that. So the two women not going up against each other was pretty refreshing to read, and the romance was great. Camilla and Rohan were so sweet together. I mean, yes, I would have loved if this one was a little bit more steamy, but I mean, I don't really expect steam anymore when it comes to these illustrated covers. I then read Eastern Lights by Brittany C. Cherry. This is the second standalone in her Compass series. I really wanted to love this one because the premise sounded good, but it only turned out to be okay. I give it 3 stars. Aaliyah and Connor met one Halloween night a couple years ago, but they were in their costumes, so they never found out each other's identities. They never had a way to contact each other after that night, but it was very unforgettable. 2 years later, they reunite because Aaliyah is about to marry Connor's business partner, who sucks, so it's pretty obvious which guy Aaliyah was gonna choose. Connor's a total sweetheart, but I never really fell in love with the romance here. I mean, it was interesting how Connor made his money. He became like the most eligible bachelor, one of the most eligible bachelors in New York City, by being a TikTok real estate star, which I didn't even know was a thing. But other than that, I just could not get into the story. And it also had a very different feel to the first book, which was a second chance romance, and this one is set in New York City. There's also a plot with an illness that I can't say that I loved, but this still ends in a happily ever after, so that's fine. Sadly though, I just didn't enjoy this one quite as much as the first Compass book. I read H.G. Carlton for the first time with her cat and mouse duet. These books were so good, but just a warning, they are dark, like very, very dark, especially the second one. Book 1, Haunting Adeline, there's dubious consent, stalking, and violence. Book 2, Hunting Adeline, is when things get rough. But I thought this first book was great. I give it 4 stars. I mean, I gave both of them 4 stars, but I loved this first book. I love Zane so much. He's our psycho stalker hero, and he is obsessed with Adeline from the very first moment that he lays eyes on her. She's an author, and she's just moved in to her grandmother's haunted estate state. I don't know if I would call the romance insta-love, but it's definitely insta-lust, and Zane pretty much claims Adeline as his from the very beginning and starts to stalk and scare her. Very romantic, right? But it works for them. Zane is also known as Z, who is this powerful underground figure. He runs a company that saves victims of sex trafficking, so he'll go in and save these abused women and children. So that whole part of the book gets heavy and dark, but the romance is so good. It gets hot and kinky. One of their very first steamy scenes together was like, wow, okay, we're going there. But I loved Zane's obsession, and Adeline was funny and tough, and she was like the perfect match for him. She did really well going up against Zane and all his craziness. Book 2 is Hunting Adeline, which I also gave 4 stars. The sequel is extremely long. I mean, the first book was almost 600 pages and this one passed the 600 mark. It was worth the read though. It took me a while to finish, but I really enjoyed it. I won't go into too much detail about this second book because it's a spoiler for what happens at the end of book 1. All you need to know is that there are all the triggers for this book. This gets so dark. So much darker than book 1. There's on the page rape, both on the heroine and the other side characters. There's murder, violence, torture, psychological torture. Things get rough here, but none of it is done by the hero. It did feel like a long book. Took me a while to finish it, but it was worth the read. I enjoyed it minus all the gruesome parts, but there's not quite as much romance here as there is in book 1 because Zane and Adeline take a while to find their way back to each other. We get to see more of Sybil, who is a side character that Zane reluctantly takes in and somehow becomes friends with. She's this psychotic girl who murders people. Her character was hilarious and so intriguing, and I'm pretty sure we're getting like a reverse harem romance for her sometime in the future. I'm excited about that, but the cat and mouse duet was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I liked H.D. Carlton's writing, and if you can handle gruesome dark stuff, I highly recommend it. I then read The Dragon's Bride by Katee Robert. This was my book club's read for April. I would have read it anyway just for the cover, but sadly I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't the monster romance that I was hoping for. Yes, the hero is this humanoid dragon slash lizard, this gigantic dragon. He has 2 dicks, but we never get any DP here. There's no double penetration, so that was a letdown. The Dragon's Bride is the first book in the series of standalone monster romances about a group of women who have been bit on by monsters. Briar gets purchased by Saul, who is our giant dragon man, and he's very sweet and mellow, which is nice, but I expected a little bit more from him. He takes Briar to his dragon world to make her his wife, and they spend their time navigating this weird new relationship. I could not get into the romance though because I just never saw why either of them fell for each other. It was a very strange read. I kind of wish it was either shorter so that it would be just all about the smut, or longer so we'd get better world building, because there's barely any world building here, unfortunately, and I wanted there to be because this monster world, this dragon world, was pretty interesting. But we never see the main characters interact with anyone except for maybe one dragon person and a demon. The book isn't even 200 pages, so there just wasn't enough room to develop anything. Not the characters, not the world building, and definitely not the romance. I'm giving it 3 stars though, just for the cover and for the steam. I also read The Wedding Crasher by Mia Sosa. I'm giving this one 3.5 stars because it wasn't quite as good as The Worst Best Man, which I gave 4 stars to. That book was so much fun and I loved Dean there, and I was so looking forward to his romance, but it kind of fell flat for me here. I thought the heroine Solange and her family were fantastic, but the whole fake dating here wasn't that great for me, which is weird because usually I love this trope. So Dean is about to enter this marriage of convenience with some random woman so he will look good to his bosses and make partner at his company, but then Solange accidentally crashes his wedding, and now Dean has to come up with a way to save his career, and they pretend to fake date. He asks Solange to pretend to be his girlfriend, to pretend to be the love of his life so he can look like a proper family man. I mean, this whole storyline is pretty typical when it comes comes to fake dating, the fake dating trope. And just like in book 1, there was the there's only one bed trope. I was kind of all over the place with this book. I liked Dean and Solange. I thought they were great characters individually, but I couldn't buy their romance. I wish I could have loved this one more because of how much I enjoyed The Worst Best Man, but it just wasn't as good. I also read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, and it was not my first time reading it. It was actually a reread. I listened to the graphic audiobook. They call it a movie in your mind because they add in all this background stuff, background music, sound effects, and my library recently acquired a bunch of these, so I thought I'd give it a try. I did notice that it was only 6 hours though, and I thought that was a little weird because this definitely does not feel like a 6-hour audiobook, but I was just dumb and missed the fact that it was part 1 and my library hadn't gotten part 2 yet. But I did like this audiobook. It was only the first half of the full-length book, but I thought it was pretty interesting to listen to. I'm giving it 4 stars. I did give the book 4 stars originally, so it's not like a difference or anything. The sound effects were nice, but I could have gone without the background music. That was super distracting. I like the footsteps, the ambiance noises, the whole cast of characters, but the background music was just a little bit too loud. Still, it's a fun experience and I like the whole production of it. It was my first time rereading this one too. I reread book 2 a million times, but I never touched book 1 or 3, but it was good and I'm probably one of the few people who don't hate Tamlin, so I didn't mind seeing him here again. My last read of April is a mafia romance. It's Luca Vitiello by Cora Riley. I decided to give Cora Riley another try. I mean, I don't hate her, but I'm very hit or miss with her books. For the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicle series, I enjoyed book 1, but then I hated book 2, and book 3 also kind of sucked. But I saw my library get the audiobook of Luca's book. Luca's the hero from Bound by Honor, and this book, Luca Vitiello, is his retelling his point of view of that first book. It was originally told in Arya's point of view, but I liked Luca's version of it too. I gave this one 4 stars. If you've read book 1, then you pretty much know what to expect. I think on Goodreads, this is considered book 0. You probably could read this one first if you wanted to, but I generally like reading things in publication date order. I like this one because I like the extra insight into his character. The whole cheating thing was explained a little bit more, and we actually get to see Luca in action as a mafia man. We rarely got to see it in Arya's point of view because she's very separated from it. The only thing I wasn't really vibing with was how everyone, including Luca himself, considered him a monster, this terrifying monster, and he wasn't that bad. Still, it was good. It was a good read, and I probably liked it more than Bound by Honor just because we get more mafia action. And that is it for this late wrap up for April. Those were the 25 books that I read last month. And before I end this video, I do want to share today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Dossier. Dossier is a perfume company that reproduces high-end luxury perfumes at a fraction of the cost. They keep the same high quality but cut out the expense of the brand name. They have a great risk-free system. You can return or exchange any scent that you purchase from them. They currently have a welcome offer up to 20% off on their website, and you can also get 30% off using my discount code LaceyT10. The extra 10% off applies on top of that welcome offer at checkout. Dossier also has a new payment method that allows you to earn store credit. Just select cash at the last step of checkout and you'll earn a $10 sign-on bonus credit. This means you can earn 10% store credit on each order. This month I got these 2 perfumes, Oriental Oak Moss and Ambery Saffron. Oriental Oak Moss, it's inspired by Chanel Coco Mademoiselle. This one smells literally like I stepped into a Nordstrom. And then Ambery Saffron is inspired by Baccarat Rouge 540. I actually really like this one. It's got this classy flowery scent, very light on the flowery, but I really like it. But those are my Dossier scents. Don't forget to check them out using the code and link in my description. A big thank you again to Dossier for sponsoring today's video. As always, all the books that I mentioned will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!